Welcome to Wine and Wisdom for Parshat Shelach. The title of tonight's class is Sometimes the Thought Doesn't Count. It's great to mean well, but action comes first. And as always at the Wine and Wisdom class, for starters, the Wine and Wisdom class usually has wine involved. I'm not going to be having wine involved tonight.
I'm gonna have wine.
Yeah. I'm going to have water. I'll make a bracha now, but if you're having wine, you should definitely make a hagafen. If not, please join me in making a shahako. If you're having something else, tea or something. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Amen. We always like to start off by giving a quick overview of the parsha. So, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about the Jewish people and their journey through the desert. Right? We spoke about the Mishkan was built. We spoke about last week. We spoke about different complaints that there were during their time in the desert, etc. And this week we get to the episode with the spies. So the Jewish people are getting ready to enter the land of Israel. Their time in the desert is supposed to be a short one, and the Jewish people say they're nervous. So Moses says, "All right, let me talk to God." He talks to God. He says, "We want to send spies." So God says, "All right, you want to send spies? Send spies." So they send these 12 spies. One is a representative of each of the tribes of the Jewish people. They go and spy out the land and see exactly how they should conquer it. And that's a key word, how they should conquer it, not if they should conquer it. But the spies come back, and I'm glossing over some of the finer details, like the fact that Moses gives a blessing to Joshua, to Yehoshua, and changes his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. And his blessing to him is, Kah Yoshiacha me'atzat hameraglim, that may God scare you from the plot of the spies. In any event, the spies go on a tour of the land of Israel, and they come back telling the Jewish people, listen, the people there are giants, and their fruit are so big, and they live in these fortified cities, and there's no way we will be like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're going to smite us out. There's no way we're going to be able to conquer the land of Israel. This, of course, was beyond their mission. They were never told to, sorry, I'm just going to try to clean the camera. It looks like I'm a little blurry. They were never told to try and see if it can be conquered. The answer to that they already knew was yes. God was going to pave the way for them, and God was going to lead them through to the promised land. They were just supposed to see how they would go about this process. And the Jewish people turn to Moses, and they weep, and they say, "We'd rather go back to Egypt. Why did you bring us here to die out in the desert?" Da-da-da. And as a result of this whole story, God decrees that this entire generation has to die out in the desert, and that's where we get our 40 years of wandering through the wilderness. There are also a couple of laws in this week, in this week's Torah portion. There's the laws of menachot, which is an offering which has flour and wine and oil, etc. There's also the mitzvah of challah, right? So just clarification. I think everybody on this class knows that, but just in case. Mitzvah of challah is not just to eat challah on Friday night. It's to bake the challah, and when you do so, to take a portion of the dough and separate it, designate it as for Hashem. So that mitzvah is in this week's Torah portion. And then, all the way at the end of the Torah portion, and what we will be spending the majority of our time today talking about, we have the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Oh, there's also the mitzvah of tzitzit is there? Okay. All the way at the end of this week's Torah portion, we have the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim, which means that there was this fellow, and I'm going to leave the details of the story. We're going to really hash this out. But there was a fellow who desecrated Shabbos. There were two witnesses that saw him, and they warned him, and then they brought him to Beit Din. They brought him to Moses and to his court of law, and they said, "What do we do? What do we do? He violated Shabbat. The first person in history to violate Shabbat." So Moshe said, "I don't know. I know that he's supposed to be put to death, but I don't know how. Not the details of that weren't clear from Hashem." And so Moshe asks, he puts him in a holding cell. He asks Hashem exactly what should be done with him, and Hashem says he has to be put to death by stoning, and that is what happens. Okay, so that is a kind of brief overview of this week's Torah portion. Before we dive directly into this week's Torah portion, people often say, and it's in the title today, that it's the thought that counts, right? And by that, what they mean is that, you intended to give me a gift, or you intended to come to my wedding, or you intended to come visit me, and I know it didn't pan out. In actuality, your actions didn't pan out the way your thoughts intended, but your intention is enough for me. The thought was very nice and very sweet, and it's the thought that counts. Unfortunately, while that statement is certainly true, and there's something nice about thought, there's something nice about intent, it doesn't always work, right? If a man wants to save his marriage, right?
Yeah.
And he goes about, he loves his wife and he has intentions to love his wife, whatever, but in physical action, he's not showing it, right? And I don't just mean he's not bringing her flowers. I mean,
yes,
whatever, whether throughout the world, we can make lots of examples, whether it's abusive relationships or if it's emotionally abusive relationships, right? But he claims that he loves her and his intents are in the right place, but somehow it doesn't come out into action. That doesn't work, right? Everybody knows it doesn't work. You gotta have the action. Certainly, if I brought you a very practical example, like if somebody owes me $100 and he says, I meant to pay you back, right? So that's certainly not enough for me.
Yeah.
And really the opposite is true too, by the way. If you have only actions, right? If somebody brings his wife flowers a whole day and does everything for her, but the feeling is this, he tells her, I don't love you, it's also not a healthy relationship, right? So clearly, just the thought is not enough. Action is necessary as well. And I guess one of the things that we want to try to explore today in this lesson is what is most relevant in this world. Is it intent or is it action?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to use this story of the Mekoshish Eitzim, this man who violated Shabbat, as a springboard for that discussion. Before we do so, let me give you an example. All right, let's say you're sitting at home in your house, as many of you are, or all of you are right now, and you're sitting at home and you're enjoying yourself, you're sitting peacefully on the couch, you're watching television, and the window shatters and a man comes jumping in through the window, and he's like about to bound towards you, and then he like stops. And he looks at you and he goes, what? You're okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm okay. Like, what's wrong with you? I was just sitting here watching television. Why would I not be okay? He goes, I don't understand. I was outside. I heard it screaming and shouting from inside, help, help. I tried to open the door was locked. So I figured I'd break the window and jump in. Somebody obviously needs help. So I jumped in to help you, to save you. And you look at him and you go, oh, I guess it's nice, but you did shatter my window. It's going to cost me $300 to repair. So what now? Right?
Yeah.
Here we have a classic example of someone whose actions and his intentions are at odds, at least are at odds with you. There's no question that had you actually been in danger and this man would have jumped in to save you, the window would have been a small price to pay for the fact that he saved your life.
Right.
Right? Or that he saved your house from being robbed, or whatever it is that was going on. But the fact is, the actions, let's say, speak louder than the intentions here, and you weren't in any danger. Right? The only thing that changed from him before he bounded into your house and after he bounded into your house is that you're down $300 with this broken window. So now what? Let me turn to you and ask you, would you press charges against him for the broken window? Or would you say, oh, his intentions were good, he really wanted to save my life, so therefore I'll let him go? Talmud, what do you say?
I would not press charges.
You would not press charges?
No, I mean, we have a saying, Machshava Kamaisa also. I mean, he had good intentions, so he broke your window, but you wouldn't want to discourage him from doing that if it was for real.
Okay, let me at least ask you to qualify. Obviously, you would try to verify that was the case, right? I mean, not that you made up the story afterwards. Maybe he jumped into your house to try and steal from your house, right, to burglar your house, and then just made up the story afterwards. It's a great cover-up if you think about it.
Yeah.
Not that this is a class advising criminals. I don't mean.
No.
Arnold, what do you say? Would you press charges?
If I had the television on and I was relaxing and watching a movie, for instance,
right,
and there was something in the movie that sounded that way.
Let's say there wasn't. You have no idea where he came up with this idea that he heard shouting. Okay. He made it up in his head. Fantasy.
No, I tried to work it out with him, just for payment.
So you say maybe not press charges, but you would kind of ask him to pay.
Right.
Stephanie, what do you say?
I wouldn't press charges.
Wouldn't press charges at all?
No.
Ahmed?
No, I wouldn't.
You would?
No, I wouldn't. I would pay myself.
You would pay yourself. Interesting, okay. Listen, I'm not advising any thieves here, but it would be a great way for them to get into your house. I think I might press charges. I don't know that I would believe this fellow. I'd be like, look, that's what you're telling me now.
Yeah.
But you did break my window, and it's nice you had nice intentions, but look at the actions here. I
But
think
yeah,
the point is clear.
But what if it was real that I was in danger? And
If it was real, I wouldn't press charges. No. I'm not talking about if I was actually under attack. If I was actually under attack, I think all of us are in agreement
Right.
that if we were actually under attack and this fellow had actually saved us, then we would probably not press charges. I mean, likely. It's a small price to pay. But here, I was sitting so comfortably. I don't know what went through his mind. I don't understand. I'm responsible for every Yoshmo walking down the street who hears voices. Right? Not necessarily.
Right.
Welcome, Marilyn. So, listen, I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong answer. I'm saying this is a good question to start off our class with, to try to understand which one, right? What is the correct balance between intentions and actions, right? As the title of the lesson goes. In any event, so we're going to dive right into it. We're going to start to learn the story of the Makosha Sheitzim, but I will just give a little preface that one of the things we're going to attempt to do over the course of this lesson, in addition to figuring out, the balance between intentions and actions, and are somebody's intentions good enough, or is action necessary, or just action good enough, or is intention necessary? We're also going to try to bridge the gap between some of the stories in this week's Torah portion, because they're kind of thrown in there unconnected. They seem unconnected, but there are definitely two major stories that happen in this week's Torah portion. They are the episode of the spies, and the episode of this fellow, the Makosha Sheitzim, the man who chops wood on Shabbos, thereby violating Shabbat. Thank you. So I kind of gave you the full story of the spies as an overview, but let's see this story inside. Stephanie, you want to get us started?
Sure. And Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to scout the land of Canaan, that I will give to the children of Israel. Send one man from each tribe. Each will be the leader of his tribe."
Okay. And here we have story number 1 of this week's Torah portion, the spies. Story number 2, Stephanie, text 1b.
And the men that ascended with him said, "We cannot go against."
I apologize. This is not story number 2. This is just the end of the story of the spies. Go ahead.
Okay. And the men that ascended with him said, "We cannot go up against the people because they are stronger than us." They spoke ill of the land that they scouted, saying, "The land that we passed through to explore is the land that consumes its inhabitants, and the people that we saw therein are men of stature. There we saw the fallen ones, the sons of Enoch, descendants of the giants. In our eyes we felt like grasshoppers, and so were we in their eyes."
Okay. So famously, the story doesn't end well. The Jewish people complain to Moses, and it results in 40 years wandering in the desert. This unfolds a couple of verses later. Stephanie, 1 second, you're not done yet. Text 1c.
And the children about whom they said they would be as spoils, I will bring them, and they will know the land that you despised, and your crops will fall in the desert.
And so this is not your crops, your corpses.
Your corpses will fall in this desert. I'm sorry.
So here we have God's punishment to the Jewish people. He says, listen, you didn't believe, you didn't have enough faith, and therefore this is not the proper generation to enter the land of Israel. Instead, your children, who they didn't say, you said they'll be as spoils, but they didn't say anything, they didn't complain at all. So they will enter the land of Israel. But the adults who are at fault here for this lack of faith, they are going to perish in the desert, and that's where this whole business with the 40 years wandering in the desert came about. Over these 40 years, anyone who was over the age of 20 passed away. Every year, anybody who had turned 60 passed away, and by the time the 40 years were done, there was only left people, the only people left alive from the time of the episode of the spies besides for Joshua and Caleb, which are they're the two famous exceptions to that rule, because they were the two spies who did not report falsely. But everyone else was only 20 years and younger at the time, right? And obviously, by the time that time came, some of them were 60 and younger. So this concludes episode number 1, the story number 1 that we have in this week's Torah portion. All the way at the end of the Torah portion, or later on in the Torah portion, we have the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Let's get that story on the table. Arnold, go ahead.
And the Jews were in the desert, and they found a man gathering.
1 second. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but you'll start again. Let me just give you guys a little bit of chronological, because sometimes the Torah can be a little bit, choppy in terms of when these stories happen. So the episode with the spies happens just about a year after the Jewish people have left Egypt. Okay?
Okay.
When they should have been entering the land of Israel. The episode with the Mekoshesh Eitzim happens immediately after the episode with the spies, or shortly after. Okay?
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. And the Jews, I'll start from the top again.
Yeah.
And the Jews were in the desert, and they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath. Those who found him gathering wood brought him before Moses, Aaron, and the entire assembly. They placed him under guard, because what should be done to him had not been specified.
And then, of course, Rashi points out that Moshe Rabbeinu did actually know that he was supposed to be put to death. He just didn't know exactly what type of death it was supposed to be. There are 4 biblical deaths that can be given to any transgressor of any sort that needs to be put to death by Bet Din, by the Jewish court of law. And Moshe didn't know which one. And Hashem tells him that it's supposed to be stoning, and that, so he was. Let's throw a question out here on the table. I'm assuming this is not anybody's first time reading this Parshat. This is not your first time hearing these 2 stories.
Correct.
These 2 stories find themselves in the same Parshat. And now I've given you a little bit of historical background or chronological background, that they actually happened one immediately succeeding the other. Anybody want to try to find a link between the 2 stories? Can anybody see how these stories might have led into each other? Or why they would both be in this week's Torah portion? Anybody?
Outside of the fact that there were...
1 second, I think Marilyn is sharing something, but you're muted. Sorry, Marilyn?
Yes, here I am.
Yeah, now we hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, in both stories, there was a lack of faith in God, or an adherence to his instructions.
Okay. So you're saying that the collective lesson is we should have faith in Hashem and follow his ways.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. Or obey his laws, and or have faith in his instructions.
All right. Somebody else was sharing before. I'm sorry, I cut them off because I noticed that Marilyn was muted.
Yeah, I started saying something.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you think?
The fact is that the situation now is that they're in the desert as a result of not having been able to go into the land, and that's the only link that I see.
So you say it's more of a technical thing. These are both episodes that happened while people were wandering in the desert. So they're both
as a result of one that.
Right. I think even you, at the end of your statement, you realize that probably there's something deeper. If we know the Torah well enough, there's probably something deeper. You're right. There's nothing wrong with what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's probably something deeper. So let's turn to Tosfot. Okay? Tosfot in Tractate Baba Batra is discussing the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. And this is the first hint that we get to the fact that there might be a little bit more to these stories. Kalman, want to read for us, Tosfot?
The event of the wood gatherer occurred at the beginning of the 40 years, shortly after the event of the spies. The Medrash explains that the wood gatherer had noble intentions. The people had assumed that because they had been barred from entering the land as a result of the event with the spies, that they were exempt from the commandments. He therefore arose and transgressed the Shabbos so that he would be executed and the others would observe.
Thank you.
But he did it just to show everybody else that
Yes.
Shabbos was still meant to be observed.
Shabbos was still meant to be, and perhaps not just Shabbos, perhaps
That's a
many other things.
stretch. That's
Thank
a
you,
stretch.
Kalman. Marilyn, you may say it's a stretch. I think most commentary are in agreement that that's the result of the story. That's what's going on with that story. I've seen this in multiple places, and the idea here is as follows. The idea here is that this was a man who was a God-fearing Jew, and he definitely did something wrong. There's no question. Nobody's defending him, but he wanted to send a message to the Jewish people. And perhaps, if we are to go a little bit further, perhaps he was sending a message to the Jewish people, not just randomly, but because he felt that this message was needed. In other words, the spies had just kind of really put a blow to the Jewish people's faith. They had brought the Jewish people to a state where they really weren't, their faith was not strong in Hashem, and now they knew that their whole promise of the land of Israel, remember, this is the generation left in Egypt. They should have been the ones to go into the land of Israel. Now that was taken away from them. And perhaps there was lots of other things going on then. I would venture to say that Tosfot is probably not just referring to some people, but this was probably a big battle of theories or whatever, or what have you at the time. There were many people probably who had this idea that, if we're not entering the land of Israel, then not necessarily do all of the laws apply. Now, I think the big question on the table here is where would they have gotten this from? In other words, where would, like, why would it ever occur to anyone? It doesn't occur to us, for instance, today, that because we don't live, to the best of my knowledge, nobody here is in Israel, certainly doesn't live in Israel. And to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't occurred to anyone to say, you don't live in Israel, so therefore we don't really need to be Jewish, right? It's like Judaism, although Judaism and Israel are very much interconnected, it's the land of the Jewish people, and it's the land of Israel, etc. And we are the Israelites, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be in the land of Israel to fulfill those commandments, with the exception, of course, of some mitzvot that are only fulfilled in the land of Israel. So I guess that's question number one. And question number two is, look, I guess this is really a paraphrased version of Marilyn's question, which is, I don't get it. So you want to warn the Jewish people, you want to guide the Jews, you want to show the Jewish people that Shabbat is real, that you still have to keep it in the land outside of the land of Israel. So your idea is to you had a lot of options in front of you. You could have gotten up and given an inspiring talk, an inspiring lecture. You could have gotten, you could have opened up a Shabbat house, right? You didn't have to wait till 1950 to start having Shabbat houses. You're going to open up a Shabbat house and started preaching to people to keep Shabbos. And by the way, to the best of our knowledge, nobody had this was talk. This wasn't necessarily people actually not keeping Shabbos. We have no record of that. That would be a stretch to say that there were people actually not keeping Shabbos, but he was the first one caught, and he happened to be somebody who did it on purpose in order to send the message? No. It was probably just that he felt this feeling among everybody. They weren't doing it yet, but in order to stop anybody from doing it, therefore he decided to be the one to take the brunt of it all. I guess more than that, it's not just that he had other options. He chooses to transgress the will of Hashem in order to send a message that you should keep the will of Hashem. It's a little bit ironic, right?
Yeah.
It's possible that he had heard a lot of people talking about the idea that perhaps they're no longer under the laws. They're not obligated to the laws.
Right. I guess let me ask the question much simpler. Who gave him the right? Okay, you want to warn everybody, no problem. Who gave him the right to desecrate Shabbos? He's still not allowed to desecrate Shabbos. If he's so holy, he should have desecrated.
Yeah, he should. Should have gone to Moses.
There could have been another. A reaction to him rather than the stoning. They could have had a reaction of, "Yay, he's not keeping Sabbath. Let's not keep Shabbat." They could have had a different reaction. How did he know that they have the reaction?
In other words, it was dangerous. You're saying the move that he did was dangerous. It could have gone one way or the other way.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. And here's one more question. Let's throw in one more question. Remember, Shabbos wasn't the only mitzvah on the table. We're talking about lots of mitzvahs, or all the mitzvahs.
Right.
I mean, we're going to get some more details later. You'll see as we go through the Medrashim, etc. We're going to get some more details as to exactly where this notion that we have to be in the land of Israel to keep mitzvahs, where it comes from. But he couldn't choose to maybe eat milk. Well, I guess milk and meat is also pretty bad. But like he couldn't choose to eat something without making a bracha. That would have been a lot more of a relaxed. You don't have to jump right away to desecrating Shabbos, which is something you get put to death for. He could have started off with something that you get a fine for. But he could have transgressed something else, and then Moshe Rabbeinu would have then executed whatever punishment it was. Let's say something with a fine, and then he didn't have to get put to death for the whole thing. Like, why did he have to go all the way, like all or nothing? Even if we figure out how he could have transgressed and how he could have, how he was allowed to do such a thing, right? So lots of questions here. So let's start off by I think the biggest question everybody had as soon as we mentioned this whole idea. A lot of people mentioned that where does this notion come from? From where do we even like? What's even the thought process behind? Oh, you have to be in the land of Israel to keep mitzvah. Okay, so here we have in text 4 we have a quote from the Sifri. The Sifri is one of the oldest midrashim that there are on Chumash Bamidbar. And we are holding Marilyn. Why don't you read for us? Go ahead. Text 4.
Okay. Although I shall exile you from Israel, be diligent with the mitzvot, so that when you return, they will not seem new to you. This is analogous to a king who grew angry with his wife, and she returned to her ancestral home. The king asked, please wear your royal ornaments while you're in your father's home, so that when you return to the palace, they will not seem new to you. Similarly, God told the Jews, my children, be diligent with my commandments, so that when you return, they will not feel new to you. Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn. So this medrash brings up a very interesting point. The analogy is meant to compare mitzvot to clothing, which, by the way, this is not the only place the mitzvot are compared to clothing. They're very often compared to clothing. Yeah. And the idea is that just as when it comes to clothing, it's only appropriate to wear the fancy and royal and beautiful clothing of a queen when she's sitting on the throne, right? When she's in her royal palace, etc. When she goes back to be, I don't know where this queen came from, or if it's a real story at all, or if it's just a parable. But when she goes back to her home, where clearly it wasn't a royal home, it would be inappropriate for her to wear them. So similarly, with regards to the Jewish people, mitzvot are meant for the land of Israel, or at least this is the notion that the Medrash is laying down, and that Hashem is telling us that even though it would be inappropriate for you to be wearing these royal garments outside of the land of Israel, or doing these royal mitzvot outside the land of Israel, I want you to do them for me, because when you come back to Israel, I don't want you to be, it shouldn't be brand new to you, that you're going to have to get used to them all over again, etc. Now, look, it's very, very important to point out that we're bringing this medrash to explain this concept. The medrash is clearly rejecting the concept, right? The medrash is clearly rejecting the notion that we only do mitzvot in the land of Israel. Outside the land of Israel, we certainly have to do just as many mitzvot. But halacha, by the way, this is certainly, in Jewish law, this is certainly rejected. I mean, there's not a single opinion in Jewish law that says that when you're outside the land of Israel, you don't need to put on tefillin, or you don't need to light Shabbat candles, or whatever it is.
Right.
No, every mitzvah applies just as much as it is. But here we have some kind of reasoning or some kind of logic as to why somebody might think that. All right, so that's what the Makoshish Eitzim is up against. That's what this man is trying to go up against. But couldn't he have proven his point with something other than? For starters, how was he even able to desecrate Shabbat? Couldn't he find something else to do with? So in order to understand this question, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive directly into the laws of Shabbat. Okay, this is going to be a little deep stuff. Well, not deep like Kabbalistically. Deep like it's going to get very technical. But hopefully you'll be with me. And then when we get out, we'll have a much better understanding as to what exactly he did here. So text 5 is from Maimonides, and it's from the laws of Shabbat. Smack in the middle of them. I think the only real preface you need to have, and I think everybody knows this, is that it's forbidden to harvest or pick fruits on Shabbat.
Right.
Okay, that's one of the 39 malachot, the 39 transgressions or prohibitions, I should say, that there are on Shabbat. So in text 5, the Rambam is dissecting what happens if a person picks fruit on Shabbat, but he does so in a very specific manner. Nachman, you want to read for us?
I'll pass.
You'll pass. Okay, so Stephanie, you're up again. Go for it.
If a person intended to pick black dates, but picked white dates instead, or to pick dates first and then pick the grapes, but mistakenly reverse the order and pick the grapes ahead of the dates, they are not liable. Although he picked what he intended to pick, it is considered a non-deliberate action, since he did not pick it in order that was intended. The Torah only prohibits deliberate action.
Emphasis added. Okay, that last line, the concept of what thank you, Stephanie. The concept of what we know as melechet machshevet is discussed very much at length in the Talmud, and the conclusion is that the Torah only prohibits work on the Shabbat. Obviously, that's part of these 39 laws of Shabbat, etc. But only if you go about doing that work, and it's intended for you to do that work. Okay, so if you mean to pick black dates, let's say it's at night, Friday night, and you can't see properly, so you pick white dates instead. Now, your action is still not allowed, but because your intent was not on that action, in other words, you intended to pick white dates, and instead you picked black dates, or the opposite, because that's the example of my mind, is the opposite, or whether it's a whole different type of fruit, right? You want to pick dates, and instead you picked grapes or anything like that, right? And even if it's just the order that got messed up, the point is that your intention was not directly connected to your actions. Immediately says the Torah, Meleches Machshavas, Asra Torah, the Torah only prohibits deliberate action, in other words, intended action, action that has the intention embedded within it, and not something that's just happening, but it's not what you intend for it. It's not exactly what you intended to do.
I don't understand that.
Me neither.
Again,
you're intending to pick grapes.
But you intend to pick grapes, and instead you pick dates. So your intention is to pick grapes, but you're actually picking dates.
Uh-huh.
So because you're not intending to do what you're doing, says the Torah, you're allowed. Let me clarify something. This is different than doing something by mistake, right?
Right.
You have somebody that brushes up against the date tree and dates fall off. That's very, very different. Here, this fellow went. He went, and both what he did and what he intended to do were both prohibited.
Right.
But the fact is that what he did was not what he intended to do. There was a disconnect between his actions and his intentions. While he was picking black dates, he intended to pick white dates. Never even heard of white dates, but
I cannot avoid to compare that to a real case in our world, not in the Torah, but imagine that somebody still goes into your house and still wants to steal your money.
yes.
And he was thinking about stealing bills and take a bag and goes away, and it happened to be coins. So is he not going to be liable for that?
So this rule, this law that we're talking about is actually specifically with regards to Shabbat.
Yeah.
Not about everything.
Okay.
Okay? And I guess that's very important because Shabbat, there's no other person involved. It's Hashem involved. So Hashem is giving us the rules about what is, it's a spiritual concept. So far, if I was making the rules of Shabbat and I was just trying to make it a day of rest, I'm not sure that I would make picking dates one of the things that you're not allowed to do.
Uh-huh.
Right? But it's Hashem who's laying down the rules here because he's telling us how he wants us to keep Shabbat for him. Shabbat is not something that we do for another human being. Whereas not stealing, a lot of the way that the laws are laid out are laid out based on the other person's feelings and intentions.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, even when they're not, the Chachamim will come and add on laws, actually. The rabbis will come and add on rabbinical prohibitions in order to make sure that people's rights are being protected. But that's one of the major differences between a mitzvah bein adam lamakom or bein adam lachaveiro, which means the difference between a mitzvah between man and man or man and God.
Yeah.
For now, let's just keep the conversation to Shabbat. So when it comes to Shabbat, it turns out that it has to be a deliberate action. Let me just continue this little crash course in the laws of Shabbat by doing two things. First of all, let me clarify, this doesn't make it doesn't justify what the person does. I feel like people are having a little bit of a problem disconnecting that. We're talking about punishment. When it comes to punishment, he certainly shouldn't have been picking, he shouldn't have been picking anything, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to pick anything on Shabbat.
Right.
But when it comes to punishment, and by the way, later on rabbinically, they said even if it's not deliberate, you're not allowed to do it. But I guess the point here is with regards to a biblical punishment, namely being put to death here for transgressing the laws of Shabbat. The law in Jewish law is that it has to be a deliberate action. Let me give you one more example. Okay, this is really maybe I'm overcomplicating this for no reason, but there is a subcategory of things that are not melachet machshevet, which means things that are not deliberate action, and that is melacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Okay, melacha she'eina tzricha legufa means I do I'm doing a prohibited act on Shabbat, but I don't actually need the prohibited action. Okay, so for instance, let's say you have, I don't know, you need soil for some reason on Shabbat. You're not planting, you just need soil for whatever reason it is. You're going to put it in a cup. I don't know why you need soil. So you take some soil out of the ground. Now, all you're doing, so far as you're concerned, is taking soil. It happens to be that while you're taking the soil, you're also digging the hole, which is completely not allowed on Shabbat. It goes under the category of plowing the ground. You're not allowed to make a hole in order to put a pit inside. I mean, it's not a pit, I apologize, a seed. But you're not allowed to do that. That's called melacha she'eina tzricha legufa. It means you're taking the soil, and you only need the soil, you don't need the hole. So you don't actually need the prohibition that's being done here. But it's being done at the same time. Biblically, you would be off the hook because it's not a deliberate action.
But is taking the soil considered work?
Taking soil is not considered work. No. If you have a pile of soil on your table on Shabbat, and you want to move it from one part of the table to the other part of the table, there are prohibitions later on with regards to muktzah and stuff like that. But so far as the law of digging a hole, it's no, you're allowed to move soil around. There's no prohibition for moving soil around. But the moment you're taking soil out of the ground, that's digging a hole. Notice how when I introduced this case, I refrained from using the term digging a hole, because he wasn't digging a hole. So far as he was concerned, he just needed soil. But the fact is that taking soil out of the ground is called digging a hole.
So it was the hole.
Digging a hole
But
is not allowed on Shabbat.
he was digging and he's not supposed to be digging.
Exactly.
What if he was digging the soil that was in his house in one pot and moving it to another? That would be okay?
That's a good question. Probably not. Probably not. It's probably the same thing. You're digging a hole. I don't think that if I remember correctly, you're catching me on questions here that are like really discussed at length in the Talmud. I actually learned these things when I was in yeshiva.
No, I don't know I don't know if that is correct, but I think that making a hole is not the problem. The problem is that it resembles the plowing when.
Yes, but you don't have to actually put anything inside in order to be transgressing. So making any hole in the ground is not allowed on Shabbat.
Yes.
But to get to your question, Marilyn, with regards to potted plants, which is your question, right? You're saying that the soil is not in the ground; it's inside a pot, right?
My question is the movement. Is that considered work? Taking the soil.
The movement is only considered work if you're making a hole in the ground while you do so. With regards to whether making a hole inside a potted plant, if you're digging in that, is considered also digging a hole or not, Actually, if I remember correctly, I believe there's a difference between atzitz nakov and atzitz she'eini nakov, which means a potted plant that has holes underneath them and a potted plant that doesn't have holes underneath them. And Marilyn, I've actually always wanted to ask this question to a botanist. I know that you're quite a gardener. Maybe you can answer this question for me. If I remember correctly, the Talmud discusses that when there's a hole in the bottom of a pot, in other words, a pot for a plant, it's actually receiving there's holes sometimes in the bottom of them in order that they should receive certain nutrients from the ground somehow, through the air, like some sort of oxygen.
Roots will go down.
It's to drain, it's for drainage, so that the plant isn't soaked in water. So it some plants, their roots don't like to be
Like that they don't drown.
Rot.
Right. But at the same time, some plants will put their roots right through that hole and penetrate the ground below.
I don't know. I don't remember all the details.
Well,
Why
and they're seeking growth in water, but yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can apply this law or this loophole, or call it what you wish, to the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Okay, so our next text 6, comes from Rabbi Levi, otherwise known as the Kedushas Levi. Let's see what he has to say. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. Who just read for us? I think Stephanie just read for us. So Arnold, go ahead. Text 6.
Inasmuch as he had no need for wood, and he did not gather it to lay in a supply, his only intent was to glorify God through his action. His work was not for its inherent purpose. He did not technically transgress Shabbat.
So, thank you, Arnold. So, says Rabbi Levi Shlomim, if we're going to go with the Tosfot's ruling, or the Tosfot's interpretation of this story, which is that this fellow didn't really need wood on Shabbat. It's not like he was gathering wood. He wasn't chopping wood in order to have wood for a fire, in order to have the wood. He was chopping wood in order to send a message to the Jewish people. So if so, then it turns out that the work that he did on Shabbat was work, that he didn't need the actual work that was being done. He could have done it any other way. He didn't need the chopping of wood. He just needed the message that was going to come out of the fact that he's going to chop the wood and what's going to happen as a result. So if so, then while it looked like he was transgressing Shabbat, and he actually was doing an action of transgressing Shabbat, he was walking the walk and talking the talk, but because in his mind, his intention was directly disconnected from his action, so therefore he wasn't actually transgressing Shabbat.
How was his intention to glorify God through his action? Through
I don't think glorify God, but his point was to send a message to the Jewish people, according to Tosfot, that they, excuse me, that the laws of Shabbat still apply, even though we're not in the land of Israel.
It was a reverse psychology there.
Yeah, I guess it is a little bit of reverse psychology.
If that is the case, what about the sons of Aaron who brought the strange fire? They had a good intention.
Very, very good. Why do you jump to a different story? We could jump even to this story itself. What happened to the Mekoshesh Eitzim? He was put to death. Right?
I don't know. I don't understand what is how is it different, this story to the one you are
No, it's not different. It's not different. In both of them, even though they had good intentions, they were not judged based on their good intentions. You can have good intentions as much as you want. The fact is that what you did actually transgressed Shabbat.
Oh, I got it.
And in their case, in both instances, they were punished. In that instance, punished by Hashem. Hashem set a fiery whatever to come up their nostrils, etc., and they died. And in this instance, through Moshe Rabbeinu and the Beit Din, they put them to death. They stoned them to death. This man was stoned to death. So it turns out, and this is a very good point you bring up, that even though we might have just figured out that it could be that he actually hadn't gone against Shabbat, but and this is very, very important, because this shows us a very important thing, that no matter how good a person's intentions are, Beit Din, or the Jewish court of law, will always judge him only based on his actions. Some of you may be familiar that it's very hard for someone to get put to death for transgressing Shabbat. Because in order for somebody to get put to death for transgressing Shabbat, there have to not only be two witnesses that see him, the two witnesses need to warn him, And yes, they ignore their warning. Then those two witnesses need to come to Bet Din together, and at the same time say that they saw him doing X, Y, and Z, and that they warned him, and that he still didn't listen. And you have to prove that he did it on purpose, and you have to prove that he, and then Bet Din interrogates them. So it's a long process. But one thing that's missing, that's not included in that process, is the business of what his intention was. Because Bet Din, because of Jewish court of law, there's no way that any human being will ever be able to tell another human being what he was thinking, to prove it one way or another. So therefore, the law is that when it comes to that part of it, we just have to go based on the fact that it was probably his intention. Because he was warned, because he continued to do it anyways. So that's why he was put to death.
So his intention then, you're saying, wasn't really to be a martyr for the Jewish people.
No. You're saying, was he aware that he would be put to death, or did he think maybe he would be able to say that?
By transgressing the Sabbath, he must have known that he was going to be stoned. And you said before that it was he was doing that because he really wanted the Jewish people to see how important it was to keep Shabbat, even though they hadn't entered the promised land, Israel. So if that was the case, then he was
sacrificing his own life.
Martyr. Yeah, right. He was a martyr. So was he a martyr?
Put his own life on the line.
In his own mind, he was a martyr. But obviously the Bet Din condemned him because even though his intentions were good to help the Jewish people, his actions were not good. So
absolutely.
The intentions were not.
I think what you're saying, Marilyn, is exactly what the Rebbe says in text 7. You want to read it? You'll tell me afterwards if that's
Okay. According to the Torah of truth, the court's punishment of stoning is only for the action of the sin. Inasmuch as his action was a violation of the Sabbath, an earthly court must regard it as a deed that entails capital punishment. His intent is completely irrelevant. And irreverent.
Thank you, Marilyn. So really, we could talk about this with any transgression that a person does throughout their life against the Torah, against the will of Hashem. Anything that we do throughout our lives is kind of split in two. There's the actual action that we're doing, which in that instance, we're going against Hashem. And then there's our intention. And could be our intention lies in a very different place. Maybe by us doing that, and really, that's not for any human being to judge. Intention is not something that any Jewish court of law can ever, tell us about. And by the way, you do have some of these, no good story comes to mind, but you do have some of these good, Hasidic stories of like Hasidic masters that were very in tune with like spirituality or whatever, and somebody passes away and they had done negative things throughout their life, and then they tell the Hasidic master reveals that really his soul had some sort of connection. I don't know exactly, that even though in this world he suffered because of the negative actions that he did, when he came up above, there were all sorts of intentions that were being judged, because intentions are between us and God, right? What we're thinking about and what we mean to say or do or think, that's between, that's between us and Hashem. That's not for Beis Din to judge. And I know usually that goes to our credit. In other words, nobody can ever tell me what I thought, right? In other words, and Hashem knows the truth. But it also goes the opposite way. That Beis Din therefore doesn't need to deal with your intentions. Your intentions could have been the most noble in the world. Beis Din just looks at exactly what you did, and they said, okay, this is what you did. This is your punishment.
Yeah.
And I think this goes to show really about the way the Torah approaches in general to mitzvah. In other words, I used to go, and I really don't mean to judge these people. I'll tell you the story anyways, because it's to me it was always a very powerful point. I love these people with all my heart and soul. But when I was in France, I had what we call in the Chabad lexicon a Meftsayim route, which means basically every Friday we would go, we'd be let out of yeshiva, we'd be able to go visit people, put on tefillin with them, shmooze with them, tell them something in the Parshat, etc., all these sorts of things. And every once in a while, you'd meet a Jew, people in their businesses, you'd visit them. And every once in a while, I would meet a Jew. I was like 16 years old, And they would throw this line at me. They would say, "Oh, Rabbi, you want me to put on tefillin?" They call me Rabbi. They had no idea. I was 16 years old. I was yeshiva student coming, whatever. "Oh, you want me to put on tefillin?" I'm Jewish, but I'm Jewish in my heart. I'm not Jewish in my actions. I'm Jewish in my heart. And I would always laugh. Sometimes, whatever, depending who it was, either I would say something that way, I wouldn't say something that, depending how comfortable I was, whatever. But I would always laugh with my friends. Like we would talk about this. We would discuss. So what is being Jewish in your heart? Is it worthless? No, it's certainly not worthless. There's certainly something very powerful to it, right? But imagine if you told your wife, or you told your husband, "I love you in my heart, but I'm not going to ever do anything to show it." It doesn't work that way, right? You have to actually do action. And not just that, but Hashem, I think this fact, that even though the Makoshish Eitzim might have had the best intention, he was still put to death because his actions were actions. And this doesn't mean that his actions show that his intentions were wrong. No. His intentions actually could have been positive. But because this is a physical world, and people have to be judged based on their physical actions, so that's what Bet Din does. And there's something true and real about the actions that we do. The negative ones in this instance, or in the stories that I'm telling you about the positive actions.
Well, sometimes someone could have a very good intention, but they didn't think out what they were doing, and they caused injury to someone. Because of that, they have to be responsible. They have to be responsible for it.
Even though they didn't intend to do it.
They do, because we're responsible for thinking out the repercussions of whatever we do.
All right. Okay, so you bring up a very good point, Marilyn, but I just want to remind you what I reminded Nachman. Let's not conflate the two issues. You're talking about something where someone else is harmed. Then absolutely, no matter whether you intended or you didn't, the fact is you harmed someone else, you're responsible for that. We can get into all sorts of reasons as to why. But let's keep the conversation focused on God, spiritual concepts, okay? Keeping Shabbos, putting out the tefillin. Right?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that says if you niskavin laharages habehema v'harages ha'adam.
Yes.
Or if you had intentions of shooting somebody in the leg, but instead you shot him in the heart and you killed him, you're patur, because that was not your intention to kill, and you get off.
I'm not sure you get off everything. I think that
like patur.
You still have to run. You still have to run to exile, I believe, to the miklat. I think.
Yeah, you're patur from Misa. You're yeah.
You're patur from Misa, right? Yeah. But that, by the way, I would compare that to the U.S. court, meaning Lahavdil, to the U.S. court. So let me just fill everybody else in here. There's a concept in Jewish law called miskavim to X, and then in actuality he did Y, which means he meant to do one thing and instead he did something else. And this has a lot to do with laws, even of murder. So, for instance, let's say someone meant to murder one person, and maybe he comes to his bed and the guy is sleeping and he stabs a knife at him. He wakes up in the morning, he realizes, oh my gosh, I stabbed the wrong guy. Right? It's light outside. I stabbed the wrong guy. So in Jewish law, this actually changes the law as to how liable he is for the death. Even though he took the knife, he plunged it into his heart, he's the one who killed him. He clearly wanted to kill someone, but because he wanted to kill someone else, this changes what status he would be in. Not necessarily is he fully off the hook, but he might not be as liable as he would be without it. I will point out that this isn't, I think in most courts of law this is the case. Even for instance in U.S. courts of law, there is manslaughter and there's third degree murder and there's all the different degrees that there are. This is the difference between them. Whether another case that's brought in Sanhedrin here, Calvin, is if someone throws a rock at someone else, but he only means to bring him. What's the joke about scaring somebody? Right? He only means to half kill him. And then I'm sorry, I killed him all the way. And there's lots of discussion in the Talmud as to whether that rock could have killed him. So he should have known. He shouldn't have known.
Right.
And in your mind, you keep banging yourself. You're like, I don't know, what are we doing here? We're talking about a violent man who clearly wants to do a lot of damage. So he made a mistake and he did more damage than he intended. You intended to do 80% kill him, and instead 100% you killed him. That's what you get. But that's not true. When it comes to a just court of law, we have to take all of those things into account.
I think as far as actions, by just saying that you're a Jew but not practicing, that isn't really what God intends for us to do, because it's through the practicing that we become that person, that we grow. It's through the practice the practice.
If I may add some words, Marilyn, I absolutely agree. If I may add a couple of words just to flesh it out, what you're saying, I think, and this is where I was trying to get to, I think from this conversation, it's becoming abundantly clear, not that we needed any more proof, but that Hashem put us in a physical world, and He gave us physical bodies for a reason. And that's the way we're supposed to go about our lives. And that's why Bet Din will punish someone based on their physical actions, not necessarily based on their intent. And that's why Hashem wants you to put on tefillin in actuality, not just in your heart. Because Hashem could have created us just as souls that don't have bodies, that don't do physical action. But Hashem put us in a physical world because He wants physical mitzvah. Why is a different discussion. I know we discussed it a little bit last week.
By doing loving things, you become a loving person and you start feeling that love.
Because Hashem created us that way.
Yes.
Because Hashem created us in a manner that we are physical human beings, and therefore we're affected by physical actions.
That's
everything that Bet Din has to go on.
Yeah. It's not so for the angels because they don't have physical bodies.
Angels are very different, exactly, yes. And this leads us directly into text 8. In other words, let's try to understand this, like what's going on behind the scenes to this concept, right? So for instance, and this is going to be another example that we'll bring here. I think we're holding comment. You'll read for us, but just to set it up for a moment. What happens if someone does teshuvah for something that they did wrong? But then afterwards, like for instance, let's say somebody does something wrong, and they do teshuvah in their hearts, and they actually make complete amends with Hashem. But there's still some sort of physical ramification, whatever that physical thing is. The Rebbe is going to avoid literal examples, but there's still some sort of physical remnants to the prohibition or the transgression that he did here in this world.
You have to go to the person and say you're
Even if it's not a person, even if it's between you, a man and God.
You have to do something physically.
There's something physical missing here as well. Yeah, let's see the Rebbe's words here. Comment, go ahead.
The very fact that the Torah authorizes an earthly court, we cannot know the inner secrets of a sinner's heart to administer punishment, proves that the punishment is directed at the visible, the external dimension of the sinner that is not impacted by repentance of the heart. A sin impacts the sinner internally and externally. Repentance only rectifies the sin's internal impact on the sinner, not its external impact. The very fact that another can be ignorant of the sinner's repentance proves that repentance does not rectify the sin's external impact. A physical punishment is therefore necessary to rectify the sin's external impact.
Thank you, Kalman. So, in the Rebbe's words, every time a person sins, there's two things going on there. Number one, we'll call intent. Or maybe a better word for it is like the Rebbe's words. There's something internal going on here. There's something internally wrong with the person, right? And it's causing a blemish, it's causing negative energy to come down to the world, etc. But then there's also the physical element of it. There's the external part of it, which means that there's some sort of physical thing that he did, and therefore there's a negative energy associated with that as well. And teshuvah needs to be on both elements, which is why if a person steals, it's not just enough that he should beg Hashem for forgiveness. He has to also return the stolen object, right? In other words, there's a physical aspect to it, and then there's a more internal aspect to it. There's more of a character or a blemish or a negative energy that aspect to it. Or in the Rebbe's words, there's an internal and an external dimension to it. So if a person only does teshuvah on an internal level, that's not finishing off that if their intent, right? If on that level they took care of it, but they didn't take care of it on an actual and practical level, they haven't fully done teshuvah. All right. So this is a great conversation. I love it. I love where we're going with this. But I have stated over and over again that the goal of our wine and wisdom conversation is always for us to walk away with a practical application, right? Yeah. And it turns out that this mistake, that the Makoshish Eitzim, the whole different worldviews, different Weltanschauungen, that these two camps, let's call it, right? In other words, the Makoshish Eitzim, the person who had chopped wood, or the rest of the Jews who thought, oh, there's no mitzvah because we're not in the land of Israel. They came from a certain perspective that they came to their Judaism with. That was the root of the issue. And if we're going to try to take a lesson from this, it shouldn't just be that we shouldn't chop wood on Shabbat. It should also be that we should have the correct perspective when it comes to Judaism. So let's try to get to the root of all this. Stephanie, you want to read for us text 9?
It is explained to in many places that the spies desired to remain in the desert rather than entire land of Israel, because in the desert, where it was not necessary to worry about earning a living, Jews were primarily occupied with the study of Torah. As our sages of blessed memory said, the Torah was given to those who ate the manna. Not so in Israel, where they would need to plant fields and prune vineyards for 6 out of 7 years. In Israel, the primary religious pursuit would be the accountable commandment. Actionable. Okay.
There we go.
Commandments, general good deeds, and the commandments unique to the Israel in particular.
Okay. So one of the mistakes that the spies made was that they chose to look at Israel through a very specific lens, the land of Israel, that is. They chose to look at Israel from a perspective of, oh, that's going to involve physical labor. That's going to involve getting busy with the world and doing physical mitzvot. We don't want that. We want spiritual immersion. And from the moment that they introduced that theory, the Jewish people kind of split into these two perspectives. Unfortunately, many of them, if not all of them, were following the spies. And they kind of had this perspective of like, we don't want to go into a land where we're going to need to do physical mitzvah, where we're going to have physical issues, and we're going to need to actually provide for ourselves. We like this life in the desert. We don't have to worry about food. There's manna. We don't have to worry about our clothing. The clouds of glory used to wash their clothing and they grew on them while and for 40 years in the desert, the Jewish people literally didn't think about the physical world. I mean, even to the very mundane elements of it. Like there's a medrash that says that one of the jobs of the clouds of glory was to flatten any hills that there were in front of the Jewish people and to raise any valleys. Like that the Jewish people should never need to go through physically rugged terrain.
Right.
And the spies loved this because what were the Jewish people busy with? They were busy with spiritual immersion. They were forging a spiritual relationship with Hashem. The problem with this was, and this is why there was something very wrong with the spy perspective, was that they were obviously neglecting the whole purpose of creation of this world, which was to be physical. To go into a physical world, live in a physical world, have physical challenges, and overcome those challenges, right? To provide for your family physically and yet still remain honest in your business dealings, right? To have a relationship with a spouse that can go wrong in a million different ways and yet still find a way to be loving to each other, right? And I don't have to go through every single mitzvah, right? But every single mitzvah has its, when you enter the physical world, it becomes much more challenging to do it, and that was the purpose. The Mekoshesh Eitzim, on the other hand, was on the other side of the coin. His theory was exactly the opposite. He said, no. This is not about theories. This is not about intent. This is not about spiritual immersion. This is about action. This is about actionable mitzvot. He recognized that error in the spies, is that the word? In the error of the spies, in the perspective of the spies. He recognized that error in the perspective of the spies. And that's why that story comes immediately after the story of the spies, as the Rebbe continues. Arnold, text 10a.
The story that follows that of the spies is about the wood, you're moving it, the wood gatherer who arose and violated the Sabbath so that he might be executed and others would take note. This story demonstrates that even sins that depend entirely in deliberate intent and moreover, it was committed for the sake of heaven, not to transgress the divine will. Nevertheless, even in this case, the defining consideration is the factual act rather than the intent. The Torah of truth, therefore, rules that the verdict in the earthly courts must be that this is considered a violation of the Sabbath and that it is punishable by stoning.
Thank you, Arnold. And this, remember how at the beginning of the class we were trying to find a meaningful connection to these two stories? It turns out that one way of looking at these two stories is that from the story of the spies arose a difference of perspective from among the Jewish people. And that difference of perspective was almost fundamental. It was really all about what is the point of Judaism? Is the point of Judaism spirituality, or is it our physical action, the physical mitzvah? Is it I'm Jewish in my heart,
right?
Or is it I'm Jewish by the mitzvah that I do? Now, nobody's arguing that certainly ideally you should have both, but can I just choose to spiritually immerse myself in my relationship with Hashem, and that's enough? Or does it need to come down to the physical world? And clearly Hashem was sending a very strong message. One second. So before Hashem's message, so what did the Mekosh Shaitim choose to do? He says, I find myself firmly on the side. I firmly believe that the only way to be a proper Jew is to actually have it come down to physical action. I disagree with the perspective of the spies completely. So he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to choose to hold up the extreme of how things would, like people often do in an argument, the extreme of where life leads you when you live the way the spies do. He desecrated Shabbos, but only physically. In his intent, he was fully committed to Hashem. He never desecrated Shabbos in his heart. He only desecrated Shabbos physically with his actions.
Right.
And what happened? Hashem sent a very, very strong and clear message. Somebody like that gets stoned to death. His intentions, I'll deal him out with his intentions, no problem. When he comes up here after he gets stoned, I'm going to have a conversation with him about his intentions. But in the physical world, he failed dismally with the point of why he came down into the world, which was to keep Shabbos not just on a heart level, but on a physical level.
But really, Rabbi, do you know of any other incidents of stoning? This is kind of off the subject, but
yeah, okay.
Okay, I don't have to say it. I think that the stoning isn't literally part of Judaism. I mean,
we can talk about that. I understand.
Yeah, that's
I understand your challenge. It's a very important thing to talk about, and particularly now because we're having a conversation about all these details. Yeah. But let's finish this conversation.
We'll
talk about that. Is that okay?
I did have a thought. I was thinking about.
Wait 1 second. Is this on that topic?
Yes.
So let's hold that conversation with the end. I want to wrap up this.
It's on the topic that we're talking about. Intention
versus action.
Yeah, intention. No, that we need to do actions in this world.
Yes, go ahead.
I just suddenly I had this thought of a young man who was. This is a story in my head. Who was married, a very studious scholar. You know, he wasn't a boy because he was married, and he neglected his wife and children, and he was studying all the time. That is, his intentions were good.
That is a perfect
example. Him into actions in his life.
Absolutely, that is a perfect example. Somebody who immerses himself in the study of Torah and completely neglects the physical making of this world into a home for Hashem. Absolutely, completely missed the mark.
Yeah, he missed the mark.
And this story sent a powerful message to the Jewish people, almost exactly like the Mekosh Shaitim intended. And Marilyn, you were in the middle of reading for us, right? So you read 10a. So go ahead, finish off 10b.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. This taught the Jews who remained in the desert that though it had been decreed that they should not enter the land of Israel, it only meant that their physical observance of the commandments would not be as potent as it would have been in the land of Israel. However, even for them in the desert, the most important aspect of their relationship with God was the manner in which it could be expressed in action to the extent possible in the desert.
Thank you. So to conclude, we have one more text, but that's just going to kind of drive home the point. To conclude, let's go back to our original case, right? The fellow who jumps into your house, it's true that he might have had amazing intentions, but the fact is that we live in a world of action. And if you were to choose, whether you choose to press charges or not, that might be out of the goodness of your heart. But when you come to even a U.S. court of law, they're not going to judge it based on his intentions. In fact, I don't even know that the judge sitting on the bench will allow the burglar, because that would be his name, by the way. That would be his title, a burglar. A burglarer. I don't even know that the judge would allow him to state his intentions of why he jumped into the house and why he broke the window. The judge might even consider it completely irrelevant.
Uh-huh.
In other words, the discussion on the table will be, was he trespassing, was he not trespassing, was he allowed to go, was he not allowed to go in, did the owner let him, did the owner not let him? These are all very important factors. The fact that he has a good reason why he trespassed and burglared into someone else's house, I think becomes completely irrelevant. Why? Because in this world, like we've been mentioning, we live in a world of action. And Hashem created this world to be a world of action. So yeah, sure. It would be a beautiful thing not to press charges against this person. And by the way, I choose to do the same thing as many of you said, which is not to press charges, if I can somehow validate and verify that that's actually true, that's what his intentions were. But the fact that I can actually press charges against him stands. And that's because we live in a world of action. We have to deal in a way of action. And this message carries through directly into our Judaism as well. Of course, it carries through into relationships, right? That it's important not just to love your spouse in your heart, but also to physically express that love, show that love, make her feel that way.
Right.
I thought of a funny joke, but it's completely irrelevant. Meaning it's relevant, but it's going to throw us off topic for a minute. So I'll keep it myself. And if that's true with regards to relationships with our spouses, then it's certainly true with our relationship with Hashem. And we have to make sure that while it's very, very important, don't get me wrong, the lesson from this class is not that it's not important to love Hashem, or that it's not important to believe in Hashem, or that it's not important to have Judaism in your heart. It should be very strong in our hearts, but it should never stop, because if it does, then we've dropped the ball, we've lost the point of the whole thing. It has to carry over into knocking a mezuzah on our door, on every door in our house, and putting on tefillin, and putting on tefillin every day, and lighting Shabbat candles, and all the different mitzvot that we do on a physical level to have a relationship with Hashem. It has to come out into that physical. And we'll conclude by reading by reading about this famous, the Rebbe will talk about this very often, disagreement, which lasted for a while, by the way, between the sages. And look at what the conclusion was. Kalman, I think you're reading first. This is from the Talmud and Tractate Kiddushin. Go for it.
Rabbi Tarfon and the elders were once reclining in the upper story of Nitzchah's house in Lida. When this question was raised before them, which is greater, study or practice? Rabbi Tarfon said, practice is greater. Rabbi Akiva said, study is greater because it leads to practice. They all concluded that study is greater because it leads to action.
Right? So it's almost like you win, but you don't win. Study is greater than action, but only because it leads to action. Because without studying the Torah, you don't know what to do. So it's true that study is greater. Study is greater than doing mitzvah. Studying Torah is greater than doing mitzvah, but it's only greater because it's going to lead to action. If it's not leading to action, it's not greater.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very important key point. So, l'chaim. I don't know, my water is done. If anybody has any wine, l'chaim. If we learn anything from the Mekoshish Eitzim, let it be this. That while the spies had very noble intentions, and even the Mekoshish Eitzim had noble intentions, I mean, we ourselves in our lives may have very often very noble intentions. We have to remember that our relationship with our spouses, our relationships with Hashem, and for that matter, everything we do in our lives is about the physical world. We have to get physical. We have to put up that mezuzah. We have to do that mitzvah. We have to connect with our spouses and show them that love in a physical way. And that's the only way that we will bring this world to its completion, because Hashem created the world flawed, that it's hard for us to do those actions. Physically, it's hard to bring spirituality into a physical world, but that's the only way to bring Mashiach. May it be speedily in our days. With this, we conclude lesson 9, or Parshat Shelach, wine and wisdom. Thank you.